Hello, I'm Jenya Delima. Welcome to Writing and Editing, the author-focused podcast that takes a whole person approach to everything related to both writing and editing. Money, power, and the lengths people will go to in order to attain them and hold on to them might be the hallmarks of the financial thriller. When the stakes are high and ethical boundaries are willingly crossed, secrets come out, our protagonists will face certain dangers, and layers of corruption are revealed. And now, here to tell us what makes financial thrillers so riveting is author Kristine Delano. Well, first, lovely to have you here, Kristine.
Thank you. I'm so glad to be here.
So, before we start, what do you think distinguishes the financial thriller from some of the other subgenres in the thriller genre?
Sure. So I think one of the things is that we don't necessarily need to have dead bodies to have a lot of suspense and sort of thrilling escapades. I
Mm,
think that more so we're looking to like murder reputations and the stakes of sort of money and success and things like that. So I think it's kind of fun to play with the things that maybe everyday people experience, but we just kind of take it to a whole nother level.
oh, yeah, I like that you said that. It reminds me a little bit about mysteries and cozy mysteries, where we might not always have, yeah, that same level of violence or as high of a
Right.
death count or maybe no death count at all. But yeah,
Right.
well, I mean, there is one, but otherwise, yeah.
Yes, exactly. And you just never know. Like I'm not anti-dead bodies, but it's fun
Right.
not to necessarily have to go there to know that what is at stake for some of these folks that have just put everything into their careers and the idea that they could lose it, they could lose their reputation, they could lose the foundation of their families. It's enough to sort of keep you on the edge of your seat.
hmm And reputation does come up a lot in your book, and I think in other financial thrillers too. So, can you explain why reputation is such a core aspect of these stories?
Right. So on Wall Street or in high finance, the idea of what are you doing for me now? And what is the evidence that you're going to be able to get the deal done? So, the idea of who you are as your reputation is just key for every bit of negotiation. The idea that a deal needs to be done, people want to work with you, people want to work for you. It is the idea of networks and what is said about you is so key. Now, what's interesting at least for me in this area, it's not always nice guys and, proper women that are the ones that are getting ahead. Their reputations can kind of be difficult, but they get the job done. And so I kind of wanted to explore some folks that are finding success in the book that aren't always the people that you want to root for.
Yeah, I think that's one of the very first lines you have, which feels like it's related to this, was we all have secrets we're forced to keep. And just
Mm,
that wording right there that we're forced to keep. So can you
yes.
explain how that works into this networking, the social hierarchy at play where they're working, and the reputation?
Oh, that's such a good question. So for me, it's all about what people do for their jobs and who is it that they're putting themselves out to be.
Mm,
So every Wall Street firm is trying to get the attention of your assets, of your dollars, of your investment. So there's so many secrets just layered into the idea of how do you find success and
mhm.
how do you, make your offering better than anyone else. So if you're already starting with that idea that you have to keep secrets just in the work that you do, there's this pile-on effect of how
Oh,
do I actually
right.
open myself up? Like, how do I actually find truth? How do I actually be vulnerable? Because vulnerability is actually seen as very, very much a bad thing, a sign of weakness.
Mhm.
And so when folks get so embedded in their jobs and they start doing that with their friends, with their family, with their spouses, with their kids, and they start layering on the secrets, some because they need to, and other because it almost just becomes a habit.
Yeah, so can you talk about how that affects the personal relationships that your main character Meredith has?
Mm. Yeah, that's such a sad sad piece of what I needed to write. I love starting stories where there's just a whole bunch of backstory. We don't need to go there, but it just sort of layers in sort of the richness and how people speak to each other and sort of the almost the coded way people talk, right? Once you know someone, you don't need to like, well, yesterday when you made me that buttered toast, right? It's all sort of layered in the way we speak. And I feel like with Meredith and Clint, we've sort of found them on sort of the first page of the book in already sort of a really difficult time in their marriage. They love each other. They got together because they loved each other, and they have just lost the ability to communicate. They've lost the ability to sort of see the best in each other, and instead everything that's said is almost through this filter of you no longer see me, you no longer love me, you no longer appreciate me, or you expect too much from me.
Mhm.
And I really feel like that's a lot of the marriages that I've seen fail is
Uh,
not this idea that it's like this bombastic, let's have it all out and everyone's screaming at each other. Instead, it's almost like a quiet quit. It's like I've
yeah.
stopped communicating, I've stopped seeing the best in you. And instead of actually having another fight, we're just gonna stop talking. And so in the beginning of the book, we sort of land ourselves there. And then it's, I think, interesting to watch as they have to face sort of the demons in the book. Do they do it together? Do they find a way to communicate? Do they find a way back to the love that they know is there somewhere?
Hmm. And do you think that this career choice goes against having these sorts of strong personal relationships? So, for instance, could you easily be one person at home and one person at work? Or do you think it'd be really, really hard to pull those apart so that they are two separate people?
Incredibly insightful. I think that is the trap that people fall into in this idea of I need to become what the other person needs of me or expects of me, or I have the energy to be for you. And over time, that really erodes your own sense of self because you're showing up all these different ways. And it all becomes very confused in your own head. You
Yeah.
stop finding any joy in any pieces of it. So, kind of getting back to the first part of your question, do you feel like it's sort of embedded in a career like this that is the logical outcome? And I don't believe that at all in real life. I have amazing friends who work in the highest places of Wall Street, and we've been friends for a long time, and we sharpen each other. We sort of call it out to each other. And many of us have very strong marriages, very strong families, but it is a work. It
Hmm.
is not something that sort of just comes natural. If the idea of ambition can become toxic, but ambition can actually fuel a lot of what you're created to be. But if you're not surrounding yourself with people that can show you the mirror when you're going off course, it becomes very easy to take that toxicity and apply it everywhere in your life.
Yeah, it's sort of like healthy ambition versus ambition that's just driven by pure ego.
Right, right.
Well, speaking of who people are expected to be, who is Meredith expected to be at work?
She is expected to behave first and foremost. She is expected to pay her dues. She is expected to find success for her company. Otherwise, no one would want her there. So she is expected to raise a lot of assets, meaning that she needs to design something, a financial product that people want to buy. She has done that. But the people that have been there for a long time, especially the men that are quite a bit older than her, expect her to pay her dues in the ways of showing deference to them,
Hmm.
sharing her success, downplaying her own role, and making sure that the people around her share in that success to a larger degree than her own team. And those are the things that just rile her. Those are the things that in some cases she lets go because she's like, I'm a player of the long game, like I'm not going to let things ruffle me. But over time, she starts to see this idea of not taking up that battle, not assuming that her people are going to be taken care of and that the right things are coming out. She starts to see that she's actually complicit in the lies that are being told.
Hmm. And do you think that any of these expectations would be different if she was a man?
I think quite a bit. I think there's such an undercurrent of what is expected of people and who deserves success.
Mm,
Now, I think it's in a lot of ways, there's a double edge to that. Sometimes because you're female, you actually get the opportunities because you look different, because people notice you. You're actually drawn in because of the difference that you
mm,
provide. But in her case, it's a lot of folks saying, oh, we really liked you when you were kind of interesting to us and you were going to bringing us a good idea, but your success can only go so far. We've put a ceiling over you, you're
mm.
crashing through it, and that's uncomfortable to us.
Oh, right.
And I really wanted to kind of explore that where, like she was hired to do a job and she was doing really good at it. And they're like, yay, yay. And then she gets too big and they're like, wait, wait, no, no,
Yeah.
take that down. Now you're a misbehaving woman.
Yeah, because we've never heard that before.
Right.
We know that it
Exactly.
never goes well for the woman in question. Yes. Well,
Right.
because you do have a background in the financial sector, were there any real life scenarios or issues that inspired you or that you knew before you started writing that they would make for an excellent story?
That's such a good question. So I wrote three manuscripts before this manuscript,
Okay.
and I felt like a lot of those were a lot more cathartic, where I could like lift people almost from my life. And I was like,
Right.
oof, I have some things to work out on the page. So
Yeah.
by the time I got to this one, I felt like I had elevated not only my writing and my storytelling, but also my character creation, where I could take traits, like interesting ways in which people use tchotchke, or interesting ways in which they walk into a room, or
Hmm.
the ways in which they hold a meeting or get their ideas out to others. And I would put stakes to that, put ambition to that, and kind of create characters. So no one was like full sail lifted out of
Right.
my journal or out of my life, but I wanted to make sure that there was really authentic characteristics and really a way for people to sort of see into a world that maybe they don't have a lot of experience with.
And was there anything in your career that you think people who aren't familiar with that area that they might find surprising or even shocking?
I think for a lot of folks, they may find it surprising how ambitious she is. She isn't forced to do some of the things that keep her away from home. She could make choices that bring her closer to her husband and her kids. And over time, she's let that erode. And I think sometimes we kind of blame the job or we blame the situation or we blame the culture, but people are sometimes complicit in their own eroding
Right.
of the boundaries that are in their lives. You mentioned that I worked in this area in high finance for well over 20 years, and I had people around me all the time just questioning my life choice. I recognized that I looked a lot different from the people that I were friends with in the small town in Maine.
Right.
But I also knew that I was committed with my husband to sort of make things work. And I'm like, don't blame an entire industry for sort of the bad actors that do it. So I hope that's surprising that it's not like it's a pool of sort of evil that runs our financial system, that
Right.
there are actual individuals making good and bad choices, that, no one's all good or no one's all bad.
Yeah, I know that's something interesting that you bring up and that we see in the story too. But even those pressures coming from home and then from work, that you should be investing your time here or maybe investing your time here instead. And even then, just how someone balances that and finds a level of investment in each that they're comfortable with, where they don't feel like they're sacrificing one over the other. So, how does Meredith do
Yeah,
that?
yeah, well said. I think that we get to see that crumble entirely. She's making choices to stay in her seat when she knows that her husband has actually asked her not to come home. And then later on, he asks her to come home and she's, still at work. And so we see that the choices that she makes and the disconnect between that. It was fun writing those things too, because when I set out to write, I'm a big plotter. So there's so much of it that I knew was going to happen, but I left kind of who the bad guy was until had most of the story written and really sort of explored. So I kind of left everyone as realistic as possible, being that they had good traits and they had bad traits. And so I could amplify or, sort of put in some red herrings and some other hints as to the culprit over the course of the story. And I feel like even with her, I didn't want to make her this put upon person where she was sort of weak or didn't
Right.
have agency. She had agency to make both good and bad decisions throughout the entire book. And I hope that people sort of see themselves in that we're not always in our shining armor all day long.
No, she definitely shows that she's not weak and has agency right from the beginning, and you can see her put into multiple hard places. I think even from the first chapter, and then how she grapples with, okay, what decision am I making? But she also makes some decisions with complete certainty. And even when
Right.
she has those people pushing against her, it's just, no, this is what I'm doing.
Right, right. And that's fun, right? Even when it may not work out for her or it
Mhm.
might not have been the best decision. That's what I absolutely love about books over movies or other forms of media is that you get to see what's going on in her head, the
Yes.
choices she's making, the uncertainty she's feeling, and then her dialogue, which is like, I am absolutely marching in this direction. Like, there's
Yes.
no doubt I've got this. And I just think that is so fun to watch that, sort of that disconnect and that
Right.
conflict within ourselves because books are the only place that we get that kind of insight into other people's minds.
Well, and it adds to the complexity of her character and how you understand her, because if you only saw those outward reactions or her verbal responses, you might have a completely different idea of who
Mm,
she is as a person if you hadn't seen all that back and forth or the self-questioning, compared to that just, no, this is what's happening.
right. And there's this one moment where she's speaking to her daughter on the phone and she asks her, "Do you need me to come home?" Because her teenage daughter is wrecked.
Yeah.
But in her head, she's like, "Don't ask me though. Like, I really can't. Like, I've got so much going on. I'm, hosting all this. Like, it is one of the biggest days of my career. Please don't ask me
Yeah.
to do the thing that I just asked you if you want me to do." And I honestly can remember moments that I had with my kids as well, where I would be like, "I'll be there in a moment. Do you need me?" But
Hmm.
I'm in my head screaming, "Please don't ask." And
Yes.
it's just the most ah, difficult moment as a mother where you
Right.
know that you will do it, but you're just pleading for them to be strong. And then later on, you're just thinking, what are some of those lies that I've traded, that like
Mhm.
they should be strong enough, I should be strong enough, all of those things. And so those were a few of those moments that I got to kind of weave into the story that I have absolute memory of doing myself.
Yes, I really connected with that part too because I've had times where maybe it's a really tight deadline and then one of the kids is having a personal crisis, maybe a friend issue or a bad breakup, or they really need help studying for something. And obviously these things just come up like an emergency. And you've already budgeted your
Exactly.
time down to the minute,
Right.
and now it's okay, so that's all just gone out the window. And
Right.
how do I satisfy both sides of my life? How do I keep them happy and make sure they're cared for? But then also, how do I meet this deadline? That sort of thing. Yeah.
Yes. And it's been my great pleasure in life to mentor and be mentored by so many amazing women. And that's, part of why I feel like the stories in the book and the scenes in the book become authentic because
Mhm.
it's not just my experiences. It's like talking to people like you where I'm like,
Yes.
yes, yes. And tell me more about that. And so it's like all those things are all swirling while I, create the characters that, end up on the page.
Well, going back to the story as a whole, or maybe the subgenre as a whole, and I do think that using those little bits of relatability helps add to this, but how do you keep the stories accessible for those who have little knowledge about financial systems and institutions and how all these things work together?
Oh my gosh, that was like the hardest part of writing this book. Oh my goodness, because I absolutely know what kind of writer I am. Like I
Mhm.
absolutely know that this idea of like Wall Street suspense, domestic thriller is like
Yes.
exactly my wheelhouse. But I feel like not only this book, but the second one I just turned in, I have like a reader on each of my shoulders, like, it's kind of like the devil and the angel, right? And
Right.
and one of them, and they're both wonderful, but one of them are like a reader that's like, Wall Street, I don't even think I want to read about that. And then the other one is like, hey, I've worked in it for 40 years and, I know more about it than you do, but I'm going to read your book. And I think, oh, I've got to satisfy both sides of this. Like, I've got to infuse enough authenticity in it where I'm not being called foul by the person that, has been in the space, but I'm also not putting too much of the financial gobbledygook in it where people
Right.
get lost. And I worked really hard on it. I feel like I will get better probably in my later books as well, because this is my debut. But it was something that I was very intent on. Every time I would mention a financial term, I'm like, have you earned space on this page to be here?
Uh,
Um, and I would often think back to watching Grey's Anatomy with my girls and all the times where they would, throw medical terms around. And I
right.
was just like, we don't really need to know
Yes.
everything that's going on medically. We just need to know that those characters are very confident that they know what they're talking about
Yes.
so that I can have confidence that they know what they're doing. And so I felt like my Meredith versus Grey's Anatomy Meredith, I felt like it
Oh
was the
no, is
same.
this name inspiration?
It isn't, but it's like as I talk about it, it actually totally holds up. Um, but it's just like being confident that she knows what she's talking about and that
Mhm.
she knows what she's talking about with other people. But hopefully people don't get too caught up in it and think, oh, well, I have to know what securities lending is, or I need to know exactly what an exchange traded fund ETF is, or something like that, where I'm like, you really don't. You just come along for a ride.
Yeah, no, that does come across, and I can see so well now how you've done that because as you're reading it, you do see her talking to other characters about these things, but it just feels like it's enough that they know what they're talking about. And because there's so much personal introspection and thinking about what's happening next or what they feel like is happening, that you don't really care about the terms so
Right.
much versus what's at stake for this person or why they're being put in this position and how they'll get out of it. Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Well, that was definitely the point, and I'm excited to keep trying to strike that balance.
And then we've talked about this a little bit, but what are some of the moral issues that you think this subgenre allows us to explore?
Mm. Well, I think in the title itself, The Lies We Trade
Yeah.
is so implicit to me in what I'm trying to do in a thriller. It's that idea of what lies are we telling ourselves? What lies are we telling each other? What lies are we using to justify our really bad behavior? And I feel like financial thrillers, domestic suspense give us a lot of opportunity to explore, when truth becomes uncomfortable or truth is an impediment to someone's success, what do people do in exchange for that truth? And I want it just to be a real big reminder to everyone about sort of the stakes don't always have to be bloody. The stakes can absolutely be sort of a tearing down of your own soul, of your own conscience,
Mm-hmm.
which is kind of huge for being able to live with yourself. And
Right.
so I find that really fun to play with. And if you can take it to sort of extremes and, play around at it's at the highest level of people telling lies and thwarting each other's success and things like that, it can maybe help you reflect it a little bit more in your own life as well.
Yeah, just thinking about that too a little bit. Would death even be the worst consequence for some of these people where reputation is held in such high regard, where you think, okay, well, at least I'm leaving this legacy behind, or people will remember me this way, my
Right.
name will be on this building or whatever,
Yes.
versus losing in all of that and knowing that's not what you're leaving behind to be remembered by.
Right. Exploring some of that where exactly that, like people would
Hmm.
be like, well, I'll die as long as everyone believes that I'm, successful and strong and a powerful person. The worst would be to seem weak or unsuccessful or a failure. And
Hmm.
those are some crazy things that people
Yeah.
are willing to sacrifice for. And it's really fun to explore characters that take that to an extreme.
Hmm. Well, and finally, what positives did you show about those in the industry like Meredith who aren't purely driven by greed or the need for self-promotion.
So, one of the things that I really wanted to show in this book was the idea that where she was at wasn't necessarily an evil place. It was just a very complex place
Yeah.
to find herself and her success. I had read so many books and nothing against them, but so many books where someone has to like leave the city to go to the harvest festival or
Oh, yeah.
leave the high powered thing to go open up their own cookie shop, which is fun. Like I totally get those kind of stories.
Mhm.
I wanted to write something different where she actually could remain in her industry, she could find her place in it,
Uh-huh.
and she could find a better balance and she could find hope for her family and the people that she loved. And I really wanted her to find that. Now, I followed her through this story, so I kept thinking, oh gosh, if you move back to the Harvest Festival, I'm going to have to follow you there. But I was really happy when with how it ended. And in the end, I felt like it brought hope to a
Mm,
lot of people that struggle in these same situations. I didn't knit everything together. Like at the end, we're not like, oh, everybody's super happy with everybody else and everyone's apologized and all of that. But I did feel like we had characters that had learned a lot about themselves, not just
mhm.
Meredith, but Clint and a number of other characters had come through a transformation that was in a lot of ways better for themselves and better for their soul. In the end, I always want to write a thriller that has some hope as opposed to closing it and being like, oh, now I'm depressed.
No, I think that's a great point too, because it shows you don't have to abandon these trajectories for your career or whatever it is. You can still stay there and keep your own inner moral compass intact without also sacrificing that in order to stay there. That it doesn't have to be this one or the other decision.
Well said. Yes, exactly that.
Well, thank you again for such a great conversation.
Thank you. This has been so much fun. And you have probably some of the harder questions than I've gotten, and I love it. Like that is like my jam is to like delve into this. This was great.
Oh, thank you. That makes me feel so happy. And thank you for listening. And be sure to check out the show notes for additional information. And then please join me next week when we have another episode where you can listen to more about craft and writing. Thanks again.